General Vex Thara stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of the Galactic Coalition flagship. Her forearms moved across the control interface with practiced efficiency, her crystalline eyes reflecting the blue glow of tactical data streaming across the screens. For 300 cycles, she had commanded coalition forces against the Devourers, the mechanical plague that consumed everything in its path across the galaxy. The war had reached a stalemate. Every species in the coalition fought according to the sacred protocols of war, ancient rules that governed civilized conflict for over 2,000 years. These protocols ensured that warfare remained honorable, predictable, and contained. Artillery strikes only occurred during designated engagement windows. Ground forces advanced in formation. Medical facilities remained neutral zones. Supply lines followed established routes that could be defended or attacked according to proper military doctrine. Vexithera had mastered these protocols during her centuries of service. She knew exactly how the Devourers would respond to each tactical maneuver. The mechanical entities followed logic patterns that made them somewhat predictable, even if they were nearly impossible to defeat with conventional tactics. The coalition had managed to hold the line, but barely. Worlds fell one by one, their populations either consumed by the machines or evacuated to refugee camps on the outer rim. The general's contemplation was interrupted by her aide, Lieutenant Zorak, who approached with obvious agitation. His scales shifted from calm blue to nervous yellow as he presented her with a data tablet. "General, we have received an unusual communication from the Terran High Command. They are requesting permission to deploy their military forces in our sector." Vexithara's eyes narrowed as she reviewed the message. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Coalition, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 of their years ago. Their planet, Earth, sat in a remote arm of the galaxy, far from the current conflict zones. Most Coalition members viewed them as primitive newcomers who had little to offer in terms of military capability. "What forces can they possibly contribute?" Vexithara asked, her voice carrying the dismissive tone common among elder races when discussing humans. "Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their weapons are chemical-based projectiles and crude energy systems. They have no understanding of proper military protocols." Lieutenant Zorak's scales shifted to a deeper yellow. "The humans claim they have studied our tactical databases extensively. They believe they can provide significant assistance against the Devourers. They are requesting deployment of what they call a Special Operations Task Force, consisting of approximately 10,000 soldiers." The general almost laughed. 10,000 soldiers was barely a brigade by Coalition standards. During the Battle of Nexus Prime, she had commanded over 2 million troops from 17 different species. The idea that such a small human force could make any meaningful difference seemed absurd. However, the Coalition situation was desperate. Intelligence reports suggested that the Devourers were preparing for a massive offensive that would likely break through their defensive lines within the next few cycles. Every available resource needed to be considered, even if it came from the galaxy's most inexperienced species. "Very well," Vexithera decided after a moment of consideration. "Grant them permission to deploy to Sector 7. That region has seen minimal Devourer activity, so they can familiarize themselves with the combat environment without interfering with our main defensive operations. Assign them to support duties under Colonel Thexnor's command." Lieutenant Zorak nodded and began transmitting the authorization codes. Within hours, the first human ships began arriving in the sector. Vexithara watched their vessels through long-range sensors with mild curiosity. The ships were smaller than Coalition standards, built with angular designs that seemed both crude and oddly purposeful. Their hull configurations didn't match any established military architecture she recognized. The humans requested immediate deployment to the surface of Kepler Station, a mining world that served as a forward supply depot. Colonel Thexnor, a veteran Korthak warrior, had established a defensive perimeter around the main mining facilities according to standard protocol. The position was textbook perfect, with overlapping fields of fire, clearly marked defensive lines and proper supply corridors leading back to the orbital platforms. When the human commander, a person identified as Major Sarah Chen, arrived at the command post, Vexithara observed the meeting through real-time communication links. The human was smaller than most coalition soldiers, lacking the natural armor, plating of the Korthak or the enhanced physicality of the Zentari. She carried weapons that appeared almost primitive compared to coalition energy systems. Major Chen, Colonel Thexnor's voice rumbled through the communicator. Welcome to Kepler Station. I have prepared standard quarters for your troops in Barracks Complex 7. You will be assigned to guard duty rotation for Supply Depot 3. The duty rosters follow standard coalition protocols, with engagement windows clearly defined in your briefing materials. The human's response surprised everyone listening. Thank you, Colonel, but we won't be needing the barracks. My troops prefer to establish their own positions. We've studied the terrain and identified several areas that offer better tactical advantages than the current defensive setup. Colonel Thexnor's mandibles clicked in confusion. Better tactical advantages? Major, these positions were established according to protocols that have been tested in combat for centuries. They provide optimal defensive coverage while maintaining proper supply lines and communication networks. I understand, sir, Major Chen replied with polite firmness. However, my troops operate under different tactical doctrines. We would like permission to establish independent operational zones within your overall defensive strategy. Vexithara found herself leaning forward with interest. The human was essentially requesting permission to ignore established military protocols. Such behavior was unprecedented in coalition forces. Every species had adapted their natural fighting instincts to conform to the sacred protocols, understanding that unified doctrine was essential for effective multi-species cooperation. Colonel Thexnor granted the request, probably assuming that the humans would quickly realize the superiority of established methods and conform to proper procedures. Instead, over the following days, the humans began doing things that defied every principle of civilized warfare that Vexithara had ever learned. They dispersed their forces into small groups rather than maintaining formation integrity. They established hidden positions in locations that offered no clear supply routes. Most disturbing of all, they began operating during non-engagement hours, moving through the darkness when proper military forces should be resting and maintaining their equipment. Vexithara watched with growing bewilderment as tactical reports flowed in from Kepler Station. The humans seemed determined to break every rule of war that existed. The first Devourer probe arrived at Kepler Station 3 days after the human deployment. Vexithara monitored the situation from the flagship's command center, expecting to observe a textbook defensive response according to established protocols. Coalition forces would identify the threat, establish communication with all defensive positions, coordinate fire support, and execute a systematic elimination of enemy forces while maintaining formation integrity. Instead, she watched in stunned silence as the humans did something completely unexpected. Rather than reporting the contact through proper channels and waiting for coordinated response authorization, small groups of human soldiers simply vanished into the rocky terrain surrounding the mining facility. No formation markers appeared on the tactical display. No communication protocols were followed. They just disappeared. Colonel Thexnor's frustrated voice crackled through the communication system. Major Chen, please report your unit positions. I show no formation markers on the tactical grid. How am I supposed to coordinate defensive fire if I cannot track your troops? Major Chen's response came from an encrypted channel that the coalition systems could barely decode. Colonel, my units are in position. We have visual contact with the Devourer probe. Request permission to engage at our discretion. Negative, Major. Standard protocol requires coordinated engagement sequence. All units will maintain position until artillery strikes have been completed and proper advancement corridors have been established. There was a brief pause before the human replied. Understood, Colonel. We will adapt our approach accordingly. Vexithara assumed this meant the humans would finally follow proper procedures. Instead, what happened next violated every principle of military science she had ever studied. The Devourer probe, a mechanical scout unit roughly the size of a coalition heavy tank, began its systematic advance toward the mining facility's outer perimeter. According to protocols, it should have been met by coordinated artillery fire followed by organized defensive lines that would channel its movement into predetermined kill zones. The probe advanced for exactly 47 seconds before it simply stopped moving. No energy signatures indicated weapons fire. No explosion markers appeared on the tactical display. The mechanical unit just ceased all function as if someone had turned off a switch. Report, Colonel Thexenor demanded. What happened to the Devourer probe? Target neutralized, sir, came Major Chen's calm response. No coalition forces were harmed in the engagement. How? The colonel's voice carried the bewilderment that Vexthara herself felt. I show no weapons discharge from any coalition position. No artillery strikes were authorized. How did you destroy a Devourer probe without weapons fire? We used alternative methods, sir. Human tactical doctrine emphasizes improvisation and unconventional approaches to problem solving. Vexthara immediately ordered a detailed scan of the area where the probe had been neutralized. The results only deepened the mystery. The Devourer unit showed signs of internal system failure, as if its central processing core had been physically damaged from within. But there were no blast patterns, no energy residue, and no indication of external weapons fire. Her scientific mind raced through possibilities. Had the humans developed some form of electromagnetic pulse weapon that could disable Devourer systems without leaving energy signatures?
Had they discovered a weakness in Devourer armor that allowed for penetration by conventional projectiles?
The truth, when it emerged through subsequent intelligence analysis, was far more disturbing than any advanced weapon system. 2 human soldiers had approached the probe using natural terrain features to avoid detection. Rather than engaging it with conventional weapons, they had used small explosive charges to breach the unit's maintenance ports. One soldier had then crawled inside the mechanical unit and manually destroyed its central processing matrix using primitive tools and improvised explosives. This approach violated at least 12 different articles of the sacred protocols of war. Soldiers were not supposed to abandon formation positions. They were not supposed to engage enemies without proper authorization. Most importantly, they were not supposed to risk their lives in suicide missions when conventional weapons could achieve the same objective with proper coordination. Yet, the humans had accomplished in minutes what would have taken coalition forces hours of careful planning and coordinated assault. They had neutralized a Devourer probe without any casualties and without expending significant military resources. Over the following days, more Devourer scouts arrived at Kepler Station. Each time the pattern repeated. The mechanical units would advance according to their programmed parameters, expecting to encounter conventional defensive positions and standard tactical responses. Instead, they would simply stop functioning. After brief periods of normal operation, the humans were hunting the Devourers like wild animals rather than fighting them like soldiers. Lieutenant Zorak presented Vexthara with increasingly detailed reports of human tactical methods. The soldiers moved individually or in pairs rather than maintaining unit cohesion. They used the natural environment to conceal their positions rather than establishing clearly marked defensive lines. They attacked during rest periods when proper military forces should be maintaining their equipment and planning for the next day's operations. General, the lieutenant said, his scales showing deep confusion colors, the humans appear to be treating this conflict as some form of hunting expedition rather than proper military engagement. They set traps for individual Devourer units. They use deception and misdirection rather than direct confrontation. He paused, checking his notes. They even sing while they work. Vexthara's crystalline eyes flickered with interest. They sing? Yes, General. Coalition monitoring equipment has detected human vocalizations during combat operations. The sounds appear to serve no tactical purpose and could potentially compromise their concealment. Yet they continue the practice despite multiple suggestions from Colonel Thexenor that they maintain proper communication discipline. The general began to suspect that the coalition had fundamentally misunderstood something important about human military capabilities. These soldiers were not simply inexperienced newcomers trying to adapt to civilized warfare. They were operating according to completely different principles that seemed to be remarkably effective against Devourer forces. She made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Lieutenant, prepare a secure communication channel to Major Chen. I want to speak with her directly. When the connection was established, Vexthara found herself looking at the human commander through a portable communication device that seemed to be located in some kind of natural cave rather than a proper command post. Major Chen sat on what appeared to be a rock, her primitive weapons laid out beside her as she cleaned them with manual tools. Major Chen, Vexthara began, I have been observing your unit's performance with considerable interest. Your methods are highly unconventional, but your results are undeniable. I would like to understand your tactical philosophy. The human looked directly into the communication device with an expression that seemed both respectful and slightly amused. General, my troops and I appreciate the opportunity to serve alongside coalition forces. We understand that our methods might seem unusual to other species. Unusual is an understatement, Major. You appear to be ignoring virtually every established principle of military science, yet your unit has achieved a 100% success rate against devourer forces. How do you explain this contradiction? Major Chen paused for a moment as if considering how to explain something complex to someone who might not understand. General, humans learned warfare in a very different environment than most coalition species. We didn't develop military doctrine to fight other organized armies. We developed it to survive against predators, hostile environments, and impossible odds. Our tactics evolved from hunting, survival, and desperation rather than formal military theory. Vexthara felt a chill run through her exoskeleton as she began to understand the implications of what she was hearing. The coalition had been fighting the devourers as if they were an organized military force. But what if they weren't? What if they were simply very dangerous predators that required different hunting strategies rather than conventional warfare? The revelation came when the devourers launched their first major assault on Kepler Station. Vexthara watched through orbital sensors as hundreds of mechanical units emerged from underground tunnels that coalition intelligence had failed to detect. The attack came during the designated rest period, violating every established protocol of civilized warfare. Colonel Thexnor's defensive positions were perfectly arranged according to military doctrine, but they had been designed to counter conventional assault patterns during proper engagement windows. The devourers ignored these expectations entirely, emerging from multiple directions simultaneously during what should have been a period of mutual non-engagement. All units to defensive positions. Colonel Thexnor commanded through the communication network. Execute Protocol 7 defensive formation. Artillery units prepare for coordinated fire missions. The coalition forces responded exactly as they had been trained, moving with practiced efficiency to their assigned positions. Within minutes, a textbook defensive arrangement was in place, ready to channel the devourer assault into predetermined kill zones where concentrated firepower could be brought to bear. The devourers completely ignored these carefully prepared defensive corridors. Instead of advancing along predictable routes, the mechanical units spread out across the entire perimeter, attacking from angles that the protocols had never anticipated. Some units burrowed underground to emerge inside the defensive perimeter. Others scaled vertical cliff faces that were supposed to be impassable natural barriers. Within the first hour of the assault, it became clear that the coalition's defensive strategy was failing catastrophically. The devourers' complete disregard for military convention was allowing them to exploit every weakness in the formal defensive arrangement. Major Chen, Colonel Thexnor's voice carried desperation as his carefully organized lines began to crumble. I need your forces to reinforce Sector 4 immediately. We have multiple breakthrough situations developing. The human's response came from somewhere in the middle of the chaos, her voice calm despite the sound of weapons fire in the background. Negative, Colonel. My troops are already engaged. We're handling this differently. Vexthara switched her sensors to focus on human positions, expecting to see their small force being overwhelmed by the superior numbers of devourer units. Instead, she observed something that defied every tactical principle she understood. The humans weren't fighting a defensive battle at all. Instead of maintaining positions and waiting for the enemy to come to them, they had somehow infiltrated behind devourer lines and were attacking the mechanical units from unexpected directions. Small groups of human soldiers appeared and disappeared across the battlefield like ghosts, striking at individual devourer units before vanishing into terrain that should have offered no concealment. How are they moving through the combat zone without being detected? Lieutenant Zorak asked, his scales shifting to colors that indicated complete bewilderment. Vexthara enhanced the sensor resolution and began tracking individual human soldiers. What she saw challenged her understanding of combat physics. The humans moved through areas where detection should have been inevitable, somehow avoiding the sophisticated sensor arrays of the Devourer units. They used shadows, terrain features, and even the movements of other Devourer units to mask their own presence. One particularly dramatic example showed a human soldier named Jenkins crawling underneath a massive Devourer assault unit while it was actively firing at coalition positions. The mechanical unit's own weapons discharge created enough sensory interference to hide the human's approach. Jenkins attached several explosive devices to critical components before escaping through a drainage culvert that military planners had dismissed as tactically irrelevant. They're not following any recognizable tactical doctrine, Vexithara murmured to herself. They're improvising solutions in real time based on immediate battlefield conditions. The effectiveness of these improvised tactics became apparent as the battle progressed. While coalition forces struggled to adapt their formal procedures to the Devourer's unconventional assault patterns, the humans were systematically destroying enemy units using methods that seemed to violate the laws of military science. Sergeant Rodriguez had somehow gained access to a Devourer communication relay and was feeding false targeting data to enemy units, causing them to fire on each other. Corporal Thompson was using a primitive projectile weapon to trigger explosive devices that the Devourers carried for breaching fortifications, turning the mechanical unit's own weapons against them. Private Williams had discovered that Devourer units could be temporarily disabled by introducing certain organic compounds into their air intake systems. Each human success represented a violation of established military protocols. They used deception instead of honorable direct engagement. They exploited enemy weaknesses rather than meeting strength with strength. They prioritized results over proper procedure, effectiveness over military tradition. General, Colonel Thexnor's voice interrupted her analysis. The human units are requesting permission to pursue fleeing Devourer forces beyond our established defensive perimeter. I cannot authorize such action under current protocols. Vexithara realized she faced a critical decision. The humans' unconventional methods were clearly more effective against the Devourers than traditional coalition tactics. But allowing them to operate outside established military doctrine would set a dangerous precedent that could undermine the entire structure of civilized warfare. Major Chen, she opened a direct communication channel. Explain your tactical intentions. The human's response came immediately as if she had been expecting the question. General, the Devourers are retreating to regroup and plan their next assault. If we allow them to withdraw safely, they will return with better understanding of our capabilities and countermeasures for our defensive positions. My troops can pursue them and prevent regrouping, but only if we're allowed to operate independently. Pursuit operations require proper reconnaissance, supply line security, and coordinated fire support, Vexithara replied. How do you propose to maintain unit integrity during extended operations beyond our defensive perimeter? We don't plan to maintain unit integrity in the traditional sense, General. My soldiers will operate individually or in small teams, living off the land and using captured enemy resources when possible. We'll hunt the Devourers the same way our ancestors hunted dangerous predators on Earth. The comparison to hunting was not lost on Vexithara. She began to understand that the humans were applying successful strategies from their evolutionary past to a modern military situation. Their species had survived by developing tactics for dealing with threats that were larger, stronger, and better armed than themselves. They had learned to use intelligence, adaptability, and unconventional thinking to overcome superior force. Major, Vexithara said slowly, are you suggesting that your species treats warfare as an extension of hunting behavior rather than a form of organized military conflict? In a sense, yes, General. Humans have always been persistence hunters. We track our prey over long distances, learn their behavioral patterns, and exploit their weaknesses. We don't necessarily try to overpower our enemies through superior force. We try to outsmart them, outlast them, and attack them when and where they least expect it. The implications of this philosophy were staggering. The coalition had been fighting the Devourers as if they were a conventional military force with rational objectives and predictable tactical doctrines. But what if the mechanical entities were more like a swarm of dangerous animals, operating on programmed instincts that could be predicted and exploited by hunters who understood their behavioral patterns? Permission granted, Major, Vexithara decided. Your forces are authorized to operate independently beyond our defensive perimeter. However, I want detailed reports on your methods and results. If your unconventional tactics prove successful, the Coalition may need to reconsider its entire approach to this conflict. As she watched human soldiers disappear into the wilderness surrounding Kepler Station, Vexithara realized that everything she thought she knew about warfare was about to change. The humans weren't just breaking the rules of war. They were demonstrating that those rules might be fundamentally inadequate for the conflicts the Coalition was facing. For 2 weeks, Vexithara received no communication from the human pursuit teams. Coalition tracking systems showed no signs of Major Chen's forces, as if they had simply vanished into the wilderness beyond Kepler Station. Colonel Thexnor expressed growing concern about the missing humans, suggesting that they had likely been overwhelmed by superior Devourer forces during their unauthorized pursuit operation. General, the colonel reported during their daily briefing, standard protocol requires search and rescue operations when Coalition forces go missing for more than 72 hours. I recommend deploying reconnaissance drones to locate the human units and extract any survivors. Vexithara considered the suggestion but ultimately decided to wait. Something about Major Chen's confidence suggested that the humans had planned for extended operations beyond normal communication range. Their species seemed to possess an unusual tolerance for operating in isolation, cut off from the support systems that other Coalition species considered essential for military operations. The first indication that the human forces were still active came from an unexpected source. Coalition intelligence monitoring stations began detecting unusual patterns in Devourer communications across multiple star systems. The mechanical entities were transmitting emergency protocols and requesting reinforcements from sectors that had previously been considered secure. Lieutenant Zorak presented the analysis to Vexithara with obvious confusion. General, we're receiving reports of Devourer forces retreating from established positions throughout the Outer Rim territories. Their communication patterns suggest they're responding to coordinated attacks, but our tactical databases show no Coalition military operations in those areas. Vexithara studied the data streams with growing amazement. The reports described Devourer units abandoning strategic positions, supply depots being mysteriously destroyed, and communication relays going offline with no apparent cause. The pattern of disruption was spreading across multiple star systems, following the known retreat routes that Devourer forces had used after their failed assault on Kepler Station. It's the humans, she realized. They're not just pursuing the retreating Devourers. They're systematically dismantling their entire support network. The scope of what the human forces were accomplishing seemed impossible. Major Chen had deployed with only 10,000 soldiers, yet they appeared to be conducting effective military operations across dozens of star systems simultaneously. According to Coalition military doctrine, such widespread operations would require millions of troops supported by massive logistical networks and coordinated by complex command structures. 3 days later, the first detailed intelligence report arrived through encrypted channels that the Coalition systems could barely decode. Major Chen had somehow established a secure communication network that allowed her forces to coordinate across interstellar distances while remaining completely invisible to both Coalition and Devourer. Detection systems, General Vexithara, the message began. This is Major Chen reporting on the status of Operation Persistent Hunt. My forces have successfully tracked retreating Devourer units to their primary staging areas and have begun systematic disruption of their logistical capabilities. The report that followed read like something from a tactical manual written by an alien intelligence. The humans had divided into hundreds of small teams, each operating independently across vast distances. They moved through space using captured Devourer vessels that they had somehow learned to operate, despite having no prior experience with the technology. They sustained themselves by raiding enemy supply depots and adapting captured resources to meet their nutritional needs. Most remarkably, they had developed an understanding of Devourer behavioral patterns that exceeded anything Coalition intelligence had achieved during centuries of conflict. The mechanical entities operated according to complex algorithms that determined their tactical responses, but these algorithms had been programmed by their creators to counter conventional military strategies. The humans' unconventional approaches were confusing the Devourer decision-making systems, causing them to make tactical errors that experienced human soldiers could predict and exploit. The Devourers expect us to behave like proper soldiers, Major Chen's report explained. They have countermeasures for organized assaults, defensive formations, and coordinated fire support. But they don't know how to respond to persistence hunting tactics. When we track individual units for days or weeks, learning their patrol patterns and maintenance schedules, we can strike at them when their defenses are optimized for completely different threats. Vexthara began to understand the deeper implications of what the humans were accomplishing. The Devourers' artificial intelligence systems had been programmed based on analysis of coalition military doctrine. The mechanical entities could predict and counter any tactical approach that followed established protocols, because their creators had studied those protocols extensively. But human military traditions had evolved independently, outside the framework of galactic civilization. The Devourers had no defensive programming for threats that operated like persistence. Predators rather than organized armies. The next phase of Operation Persistent Hunt demonstrated the full extent of human tactical innovation. Rather than simply destroying individual Devourer units, the human teams began conducting what they called behavioral modification operations. They would attack specific targets in carefully planned sequences designed to force the Devourers to adapt their programming in predictable ways. Sergeant Martinez had spent 3 weeks studying a particular Devourer manufacturing facility, learning the security patterns and maintenance schedules. Instead of destroying the facility immediately, she began conducting small raids that forced the security systems to upgrade their defensive protocols. Each upgrade made the facility more secure against conventional attacks, but also more predictable in its responses to specific stimuli. After 2 months of careful manipulation, Martinez was able to trigger a cascade failure that caused the facility's own security systems to destroy it from within. Corporal Hawar Singh discovered that Devourer units could be programmed to follow false orders if those orders were transmitted using proper authentication codes. Instead of attempting to break the encryption systems, Singh's team captured individual Devourers and studied their behavioral responses until they could mimic the communication patterns perfectly. They then used these patterns to send conflicting orders to entire Devourer formations, causing massive confusion and friendly fire incidents. Private Jackson found that Devourers had difficulty distinguishing between different types of organic compounds when their chemical sensors were overloaded with complex mixtures. She developed a technique for creating chemical camouflage that made human soldiers appear to be naturally occurring environmental phenomena rather than living creatures. Jackson's innovation allowed human teams to move through heavily defended areas without triggering any automated security responses. Each breakthrough represented not just tactical success, but a fundamental redefinition of what warfare could be. The humans were treating their enemies not as military opponents to be defeated through superior force, but as complex systems to be understood, manipulated, and ultimately controlled. General, Lieutenant Zorak reported with awe in his voice, the latest intelligence estimates suggest that human forces have effectively neutralized over 60% of Devourer operational capability in the Outer Rim sectors. They've accomplished this using only the 10,000 troops originally deployed, with minimal coalition support and no significant casualties. Vexthara stared at the tactical displays showing the extent of human operations. Red markers indicated confirmed Devourer positions at the beginning of Operation Persistent Hunt. Green markers showed areas where human teams had successfully eliminated or neutralized enemy forces. The green areas were spreading like a slow-moving wave across the galactic map, consuming the red zones with methodical efficiency. "They're not just winning battles," she murmured. "They're rewriting the fundamental principles of how wars are fought." The realization that followed would change everything about how the Galactic Coalition approached military conflict. The humans weren't breaking the rules of war because they were ignorant or inexperienced. They were breaking those rules because the rules themselves were inadequate for dealing with enemies that operated outside the framework of civilized military tradition. If the Coalition was going to survive the Devourer threat, every species would need to learn to think like hunters rather than soldiers. The emergency session of the Coalition High Command convened on the flagship Eternal Vigilance, with representatives from all 47 member species attending either in person or through quantum communication links. Vexthara had been summoned. to present her analysis of human military capabilities and their implications for coalition strategy against the Devourers. Supreme Commander Thalvex, an ancient Korthak whose battle experience spanned over 6 centuries, presided over the assembly with visible skepticism. His massive frame dominated the central platform as he addressed the gathered officers and politicians. General Vexithara, your reports regarding human tactical methods have raised significant concerns among the High Command. Some of our military advisors believe that allowing these primitive newcomers to operate outside established protocols sets a dangerous precedent that could undermine the entire foundation of civilized warfare. Vexithara activated the holographic display system and began presenting the data she had compiled during weeks of observing human operations. Supreme Commander, members of the High Command, I understand the concerns about protocol violations. However, the results speak for themselves. In 6 weeks of independent operations, human forces have achieved what our conventional forces could not accomplish in 6 years of fighting. The display showed detailed maps of Devourer territorial losses across 17 star systems. Red zones indicating enemy control had been systematically replaced by green areas where human teams had either eliminated or neutralized mechanical forces. The rate of territorial recovery was unprecedented in coalition military history. Admiral Zurin of the Zentari Defense Fleet raised one of her secondary arms in question. General, these results are impressive, but at what cost? How many human casualties have been sustained during these unconventional operations? Vexithara paused before answering, knowing that her response would challenge every assumption about the relationship between tactical effectiveness and military losses. Admiral, according to the latest reports from Major Chen, human forces have sustained a casualty rate of less than 2% during their extended operations. This includes both killed and wounded personnel. A wave of shocked silence passed through the assembly. According to established military science, operations of the scope and intensity that the humans were conducting should have resulted in casualty rates of at least 30 to 40%, even under optimal conditions. A 2% loss rate suggested either that the humans were avoiding serious combat entirely, or that their tactical methods were so effective that enemy forces couldn't mount effective counterattacks. Impossible, declared General Kexihara of the Vylaran ground forces. No military unit can sustain offensive operations across multiple star systems with such minimal losses. Either your intelligence data is flawed, or the humans are grossly exaggerating their accomplishments. Before Vexithara could respond, the communication system activated with an incoming priority message. Major Chen's voice filled the chamber, transmitted from somewhere deep in former Devourer territory. Supreme Commander, members of the High Command, this is Major Chen requesting permission to address the Assembly directly. Supreme Commander Thalvex granted the request, and the holographic projector displayed the human officer's image. She appeared to be seated in what looked like a captured Devourer command center, with alien technology visible in the background. Her uniform was worn and practical rather than ceremonial, and she carried weapons that seemed primitive compared to Coalition standards. Major Chen, the Supreme Commander began, you have heard the concerns expressed by members of the High Command. Please explain how your forces have achieved such remarkable results while operating outside established military protocols. Major Chen's response was direct and confident. Supreme Commander, our success comes from understanding that the Devourers are not a conventional military force. They are an artificial intelligence system optimized to counter traditional military tactics. When we fight them according to established protocols, we're playing a game where they know all the rules and have prepared countermeasures for every possible move. She gestured toward something off-screen, and the display showed captured Devourer tactical databases. My teams have been studying their decision-making algorithms extensively. The mechanical entities respond to threats based on probability, calculations derived from historical analysis of coalition military doctrine. They can predict and counter any strategy that follows conventional patterns because their programming includes detailed analysis of those patterns. General Kexhara interrupted with obvious frustration. Are you suggesting that centuries of military development across dozens of species has produced inferior tactical doctrine? That your primitive human methods are somehow superior to the combined wisdom of galactic civilization? Major Chen's expression remained respectful, but firm. General, I'm suggesting that our methods are different, not necessarily superior. Human military traditions developed in isolation from galactic civilization. We evolved tactics for hunting predators and surviving in hostile environments rather than fighting organized armies. The Devourers operate on programmed algorithms that expect rational military behavior. When we approach them as hunters tracking dangerous prey instead of soldiers following established formations, their programming doesn't know how to respond effectively. They've analyzed every major battle in Coalition history, but they have no data on persistence hunting techniques developed by primitive human ancestors. Supreme Commander Thalvex leaned forward with interest. Major provides specific examples of how these hunting techniques translate to effective military operations against technologically advanced enemies. Certainly, sir. Yesterday, Sergeant Williams eliminated an entire Devourer patrol unit using techniques adapted from how our ancestors hunted mammoths on Earth. She tracked the patrol for 3 days, learning their movement patterns and identifying the lead unit that coordinated the others. Instead of attacking the entire group, she isolated and neutralized the coordinator during its routine maintenance cycle. Without leadership signals, the remaining units defaulted to basic defensive programming and became easy targets for conventional weapons. Admiral Zurin's mandibles clicked in confusion. Major, Coalition forces could have achieved the same result using coordinated artillery strikes and proper tactical formations. Why risk individual soldiers in close quarters infiltration when superior firepower could eliminate the threat more efficiently? Because superior firepower requires predictable enemy positions, Admiral. The Devourers have countermeasures for every conventional weapon system in Coalition arsenals. They can calculate optimal defensive positions based on the range and capabilities of your artillery. But they can't predict where a single human soldier will appear when she's been crawling through drainage systems for 18 hours to reach an unexpected attack position. Major Chen activated a tactical display that showed the interior schematics of a massive Devourer fortress complex. 3 weeks ago, my teams infiltrated the primary Devourer command center for Sector 12. According to Coalition tactical analysis, this facility would require a full-scale assault involving at least 50,000 troops supported by orbital bombardment. The defensive systems were designed to repel exactly that kind of attack. The display zoomed in to show detailed views of the fortress's security arrangements. Automated weapon systems covered every approach corridor. Energy shields protected critical facilities. Detection networks monitored all conventional infiltration routes. The fortress was a perfect example of Devourer defensive philosophy, designed to counter any threat that followed established military doctrine. Instead of assaulting the fortress, we studied its operational patterns for 2 weeks. The facility followed strict maintenance schedules designed to maximize efficiency. Every 72 hours, specific sections would go offline for routine servicing. During these maintenance windows, automated systems would shut down to prevent interference with repair operations. The display showed the infiltration route that human teams had used, threading through maintenance corridors during precisely timed windows when security systems were offline. Corporal Thompson and Private Lee accessed the Central Command Core during a scheduled maintenance cycle. Instead of destroying the facility, they introduced modified programming that caused the Devourer systems to misidentify friendly units as hostile targets. Vexathara watched the faces of the High Command members as they began to understand the implications. The humans hadn't destroyed the fortress through superior firepower. They had turned it against itself using patience, observation, and an understanding of system vulnerabilities that conventional military analysis would never have identified. The result, Major Chen continued, was that the entire Devourer defense network for Sector 12 collapsed within 6 hours as automated systems began attacking each other. We eliminated thousands of enemy units without firing a single shot and captured intact facilities that provided valuable intelligence about Devourer manufacturing capabilities. General Kexhara's voice carried grudging respect mixed with obvious discomfort. Major, these methods may be effective. 6 months after the emergency session of the Coalition High Command, Vexathara stood in the same command center, where she had first observed human tactical methods with bewilderment and skepticism. Now holographic displays showed coalition forces across 17 sectors, implementing modified versions of human hunting strategies alongside traditional military doctrine. The transformation had been remarkable, controversial, and undeniably effective. The High Command's final decision had been a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but offered the best chance for coalition survival. Rather than abandoning the sacred protocols entirely, or rejecting human methods outright, they had established a new tactical framework that combined conventional military doctrine with what became known as adaptive hunting strategies. Coalition forces would continue to operate according to established protocols when facing conventional threats, but would employ human-inspired techniques when confronting enemies that operated outside civilized military traditions. Major Chen, recently promoted to colonel, had been appointed as the coalition's first director of unconventional warfare. Her responsibilities included training teams from other species in human tactical methods, while developing new approaches that combined the strengths of different military traditions. The results exceeded even Vexathera's optimistic expectations. General, Lieutenant Zorak reported with scales showing excitement colors. The latest intelligence summary shows that Devourer territorial control has decreased by 42% across all active combat zones. Enemy manufacturing capacity has been reduced by 60%, and their communication networks show signs of systematic degradation that suggest coordinated long-term disruption campaigns. The transformation hadn't been easy. Many coalition species struggled to adapt their natural military instincts to unconventional tactics. The Korthak, with their emphasis on honor and direct confrontation, found deception-based strategies particularly difficult to implement. The Zentari, accustomed to precise formations and coordinated maneuvers, had trouble operating in the small independent units that human tactics required. However, some species proved remarkably adaptable to human methods. The Valarans, with their natural camouflage abilities, excelled at infiltration techniques. The Thexians, whose society emphasized patience and long-term planning, became masters of the persistence hunting strategies that humans had developed. Even the proud Korthak discovered that their strength and endurance made them devastatingly effective when properly trained in close quarters. Infiltration techniques, Vexthara's own understanding of warfare, had been fundamentally changed by working with human advisors. She had learned to think beyond the tactical frameworks that had defined her career, to see conflicts as complex systems that could be influenced and manipulated rather than simply as contests of military strength. Her greatest success had come during the liberation of Nexus Prime, where she had used a combination of traditional coalition tactics and human-inspired psychological warfare to turn an entire Devourer fleet against its own command structure. Colonel Chen, Vexathera activated the communication link to the human commander, who was currently operating deep in Devourer territory on what humans called a deep reconnaissance mission. Please provide your assessment of Operation Silverhunt. The response came from a captured Devourer facility that Chen's teams had converted into a forward operating base. General, Operation Silverhunt has exceeded all projected objectives. My teams have successfully infiltrated the primary Devourer manufacturing complex in Sector 19. We've identified the central coordination hub that controls production across multiple star systems. Operation Silver Hunt represented the most ambitious application of human tactical principles attempted by coalition forces. Rather than trying to destroy Devourer manufacturing facilities through conventional assault, Chen's teams were conducting a months-long infiltration campaign designed to gain control of the entire production network. The plan involved placing human operatives inside key facilities, where they would slowly modify manufacturing algorithms to produce defective equipment and weapons. The beauty of this approach, Chen continued, is that the Devourer's own quality control systems are working against them. We're not introducing obvious sabotage that would trigger security responses. Instead, we're making subtle modifications that cause equipment to fail after extended use. The Devourers are manufacturing weapons that will malfunction during critical combat situations, vehicles that will break down during long-range operations, and communication equipment that will develop interference problems over time. Vexathara marveled at the elegance of the strategy. Coalition intelligence estimated that it would take the Devourers months or even years to identify the source of their equipment failures. During that time, their military effectiveness would gradually degrade as faulty equipment accumulated throughout their forces. Meanwhile, human teams would continue operating inside the manufacturing network, making additional modifications and gathering intelligence about Devourer capabilities. Colonel, what is your assessment of Devourer adaptation to our new tactical approaches? There was a pause before Chen responded, and Vexithara could hear the sound of machinery in the background. That's the most concerning aspect of the current situation, General. The Devourers are learning. Their artificial intelligence systems are beginning to develop countermeasures for human tactics. We've observed increased security protocols at critical facilities, improved detection systems designed to identify organic infiltrators, and modified patrol patterns that make persistence hunting more difficult. This adaptation represented the greatest challenge facing the Coalition's new military doctrine. The Devourer's artificial intelligence was designed to learn from experience and modify its programming to counter new threats. Human tactics had been effective primarily because the mechanical entities had no prior experience with hunting-based strategies. But that advantage was temporary. However, Chen continued with characteristic confidence, the Devourers have a fundamental weakness that we can exploit. Their programming is based on logical analysis and pattern recognition. They assume that successful tactics will be repeated in similar situations. But human military tradition emphasizes constant innovation and adaptation. Every time they develop countermeasures for our current methods, we develop new approaches that make their countermeasures obsolete. Vexithara recognized this as perhaps the most important insight that humans had brought to Coalition military doctrine. The sacred protocols of war had emphasized consistency and predictability, because those qualities made it easier to coordinate complex multi-species operations. But consistency also made Coalition forces predictable to enemies who could study and counter their tactical patterns. Human military culture embraced chaos, improvisation, and constant change as natural elements of warfare. They viewed rigid tactical doctrine not as a strength but as a vulnerability that enemies could exploit. This philosophy was gradually spreading throughout Coalition forces, transforming military units that had operated, according to unchanging procedures for centuries, into adaptive organizations capable of continuous innovation. The transformation was visible in the latest battle reports from across Coalition space. Korthak heavy assault units were now using modified infiltration techniques to bypass heavily defended positions. Centauri fleet formations were implementing unpredictable movement patterns that confused enemy targeting systems. Viloran special operations teams were combining their natural camouflage with human persistence hunting methods to eliminate high-value targets deep in enemy territory. General Vexithara, Supreme Commander Thalvex's voice came through the priority communication channel. Please report to the High Command Chamber immediately. We have received intelligence that requires immediate strategic assessment. As Vexithara made her way to the command chamber, she reflected on how dramatically the situation had changed since that first day when she had dismissed human military capabilities as primitive and irrelevant. The humans hadn't just helped the Coalition win individual battles against the Devourers. They had forced an entire galactic civilization to reconsider fundamental assumptions about warfare, strategy, and survival. The intelligence waiting for her in the command chamber would prove that this transformation had been not just beneficial, but absolutely essential for the survival of organic life in the galaxy. The Devourers' next move would test everything that Coalition forces had learned about unconventional warfare, and the stakes could not have been higher.